Good morning. This is Pastor Jason of Kona Faith Center with a word for today. And the word for today is slave. A slave is someone who is forced to work for and obey another. A slave is someone who is considered to be somebody else's property. A slave is someone who is subject to another. The issue in this part of Romans is sin. And Paul says those who sin, those who yield to sin, those who obey the desires of the flesh and sin are slaves to sin. Those who do righteousness, who yield to righteousness, who obey righteousness are slaves of righteousness. Notice that there are no other options. We have to serve. Our only choice is whether we will serve sin or serve righteousness. So the big question is it okay to keep on sinning because we are under grace? And his answer is, may it never be. Absolutely not. You got to be kidding me. No way. Nevers. How can we who died to sin continue to live in sin? See, this is a tough question because if we really understand what is being said by the Holy Spirit, stop sinning, start living righteously, we would recognize you can't do both. You got to do one or the other. Then we find ourselves in a quandary. How do we stop sinning? How do we live righteously? Those who are in Jesus are immersed into his death. We are buried with him in order that we might be raised to new life in him. Jesus died, Jesus rose. We must die to self and serve sin no longer. Jesus died to sin once for all. Jesus lives to God. So if I consider myself dead to sin and alive to God in Jesus, I'll stop sinning. In other words, we have to choose to let God tell us what to do all the time. We have to choose to respond in obedience to God without debate, without resistance. We are, after all, slaves. Therefore, do not let sin rule by obeying its desires. Do not yield to sin. Yield to God. Yield to righteousness. Just say no to sin. Just say yes to God. Just say yes to righteousness. Whatever we yield to, whatever we obey, we become slaves to. Either slaves to sin or slaves to righteousness. Thank God we have obeyed wholeheartedly and have been set free from sin and have become enslaved to righteousness, which results in holiness. Sin leads to death. Righteousness leads to holiness, producing fruit and life as God has it. So be a slave today. Be God's slave today. Be righteousness slave today. Die to sin. Die to self. Be raised to new life in Jesus. The word for today is slave. God bless. Check in tomorrow.